In the marble corridors of Ravencrest Manor, where million-dollar decisions were made over morning tea, security guard Marcus Thompson never expected to witness the one moment that would shatter a family dynasty forever. What started as a routine check of the mansion's security cameras at 2:47 a.m. would expose a web of betrayal so shocking that it would leave the powerful Ashford family questioning everything they thought they knew about loyalty, love, and blood ties. Marcus Thompson had been working the night shift at Ravencrest Manor for 3 years, and he thought he had seen it all. The sprawling estate belonged to the Ashford family, one of the wealthiest dynasties in the country. With their vast business empire spanning real estate, technology, and international investments, the Ashfords were accustomed to a life of luxury and privilege that most people could only dream of. The manor itself was a testament to their wealth. A massive Georgian-style mansion with 43 rooms, manicured gardens stretching for acres, and security systems that rivaled those of government buildings. Marcus had been hired not just for his military background, but for his discretion. The Ashfords valued their privacy above all else, and Marcus understood that what happened within those walls stayed within those walls. The family consisted of 3 main members who lived at the estate. William Ashford, the patriarch and CEO of Ashford Industries, was a stern man in his early 60s who had built the family fortune from a modest inheritance into a billion-dollar empire. His wife, Camilla, had married into the family 15 years ago and had quickly adapted to the lifestyle of the ultra-wealthy. Then there was Harry, William's younger brother, who had always lived in William's shadow despite being equally intelligent and ambitious. On this particular night in late October, Marcus was conducting his usual rounds when something caught his attention on the security monitor in the main control room. The estate's advanced surveillance system covered every corner of the property, from the grand entrance to the private offices tucked away in the east wing. At exactly 2:47 a.m., Marcus noticed a figure moving through the hallway leading to William's private study. The infrared cameras showed it was Camilla, dressed in a silk robe, and moving with purpose rather than the casual gait of someone unable to sleep. This wasn't entirely unusual. Family members often wandered the halls at night, whether due to insomnia or late-night work. However, something about her movements seemed different, more secretive. Marcus leaned closer to the monitor, adjusting the camera angle to get a better view. Camilla had entered William's study, a room that housed not only his personal computer, but also access to various family business accounts. William was currently in Tokyo on business, having left 3 days earlier for a series of important meetings with potential Asian partners. Through the high-definition cameras, Marcus watched as Camilla seated herself at William's mahogany desk and powered up his computer. The blue glow of the screen illuminated her face as she began typing with rapid precision. Her fingers moved across the keyboard with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. Marcus felt a knot forming in his stomach. In his years of service with the family, he had learned to recognize when something was amiss. Camilla's behavior triggered every instinct he had developed during his military service and subsequent security training. He reached for his phone to call William, then hesitated. What if this was perfectly innocent? What if she was simply handling some family business that William had asked her to take care of while he was away? But as Marcus continued to watch, his concerns deepened. Camilla had opened what appeared to be the family's banking interface, something that typically required multiple levels of authorization. The Ashford family's financial arrangements were complex, with numerous accounts, trusts, and investment portfolios spread across different institutions and countries. For the next 20 minutes, Marcus observed as Camilla navigated through various screens, her expression focused and determined. She seemed to be accessing specific accounts and inputting lengthy strings of numbers, account numbers, routing information, and what appeared to be authorization codes. Then, at 3:12 a.m., Marcus witnessed something that made his blood run cold. On one of the security cameras positioned to monitor the study's computer screen, he could clearly see Camilla initiating a wire transfer. The amount displayed on the screen made Marcus blink twice to make sure he was reading it correctly. $2.3 million. The destination account information was partially visible, and Marcus could make out enough details to realize that the funds were being transferred to an account that didn't belong to any of the family's known business entities or personal accounts. More troubling still was the beneficiary name he could glimpse on the screen, Harold Ashford Harry's legal name. Marcus's mind raced as he tried to process what he was witnessing. Why would Camilla be transferring such a large sum to Harry in the middle of the night while William was out of the country? Why the secrecy? Why not wait until morning or until William returned? As the transfer processed, Marcus noticed Camilla's behavior becoming even more suspicious. She kept glancing toward the study door, as if worried about being discovered. Her movements had the calculated efficiency of someone who had planned this moment carefully. This wasn't a spontaneous decision. It was a deliberate, premeditated action. After completing the transfer, Camilla didn't immediately leave the study. Instead, she spent another 10 minutes accessing additional accounts, reviewing balances, and what appeared to be deleting certain transaction records from the computer's browser history. Her familiarity with these systems suggested she had done this before, or at the very least had spent considerable time learning how to navigate them without detection. Marcus realized he was witnessing what could only be described as embezzlement on a massive scale. The implications were staggering, not just for the family's finances, but for the relationships and trust that held the Ashford dynasty together. At 3:31 a.m., Camilla finally powered down the computer and prepared to leave the study. But before she could exit, Marcus made a decision that would change everything. He activated the Manor's internal communication system and, using the intercom connected to the study, spoke in a calm but authoritative voice. "Mrs. Ashford, this is Marcus from security. Could I have a word with you, please?" The effect was immediate and dramatic. Camilla froze at the study door, her hand still on the handle. Through the camera, Marcus could see her face pale as she realized she had been observed. For a long moment, she stood motionless, probably calculating her options. When she finally responded, her voice carried through the intercom with forced calm. "Of course, Marcus. I'll be right there." But instead of heading to the security office as expected, Camilla quickly returned to the computer. Marcus watched as she frantically attempted to access the banking system again, her fingers flying across the keyboard in what appeared to be an attempt to reverse or modify the transaction she had just completed. However, the wire transfer had already been processed and confirmed. The $2.3 million had been successfully moved from the Ashford family's primary investment account to Harry's personal account. There was no immediate way to recall the funds, especially not without proper authorization from William himself. Realizing her predicament, Camilla abandoned the computer and hurried toward the security office. Marcus prepared himself for what he knew would be a difficult conversation. He had been in challenging situations before, but never one that involved exposing the criminal activity of his employer's spouse. When Camilla entered the security office, she attempted to maintain her composure, but Marcus could see the anxiety in her eyes. She was still wearing her silk robe, and her usually perfectly styled hair showed signs of stress. "Marcus," she began, her voice carrying the authoritative tone she typically used with staff, "I hope there isn't a problem. I was just handling some urgent family business that couldn't wait until morning." Marcus looked at her steadily, his military training helping him remain calm under pressure. "Mrs. Demon Ashford, I observed you accessing Mr. Ashford's computer and initiating what appeared to be a significant financial transaction. Given that Mr. Ashford is currently out of the country, I felt it was necessary to verify that this activity was authorized." Camilla's face flushed slightly, but she maintained her composed facade. "Of course it was authorized. William asked me to handle several financial matters while he was in Tokyo. Surely you don't think I would access family accounts without permission?" Marcus nodded slowly, but his expression remained serious. "I understand, Mrs. Ashford. However, given the size of the transaction I witnessed, I believe it would be appropriate to contact Mr. Ashford directly to confirm the authorization. It's standard security protocol for transfers of this magnitude." The mention of contacting William directly caused Camilla's composure to crack slightly. "That won't be necessary, Marcus. William specifically asked me to handle these matters discreetly while he was away. Disturbing him in Tokyo would be counterproductive." But Marcus had already made his decision. The welfare and security of the Ashford family was his primary responsibility, and what he had witnessed raised too many red flags to ignore. "I appreciate your position, Mrs. Ashford, but I must insist on following proper protocol. The security of the family's financial assets is paramount. As Marcus reached for his phone to call William in Tokyo, Camilla's mask finally slipped completely. "Please, Marcus," she said, her voice taking on a desperate edge, "you don't understand the situation. This is more complicated than it appears." Marcus paused, looking at her with a mixture of professional concern and personal sympathy. Despite what he had witnessed, he had always found Camilla to be a decent person during their interactions over the years. But his duty was clear. "Mrs. Ashford, if there are extenuating circumstances, then Mr. Ashford needs to be aware of them. Transparency is the best way forward for everyone involved." With that, Marcus dialed William's international number, knowing that he was about to set in motion a chain of events that would forever alter the Ashford family dynamics. As the phone rang halfway across the world, Camilla sank into a chair, the weight of her actions finally becoming fully apparent to her. The conversation with William was brief but intense. Even across the international connection, Marcus could hear the shock and anger in William's voice as he learned about the unauthorized transfer. William's immediate response was swift and decisive. "Freeze all family accounts immediately and detain Camilla until he could return to handle the situation personally." As Marcus ended the call, he looked at Camilla with a mixture of professionalism and regret. "Mrs. Ashford, Mr. Ashford has requested that you remain in the manor until he returns. He's also instructed me to contact the family's legal team and financial advisors immediately." Camilla nodded numbly, the reality of her situation finally sinking in. The carefully constructed life she had built over 15 years was crumbling around her, and there was no way to undo what she had set in motion. The first part of what would become the Ashford family's greatest crisis had concluded, but Marcus knew that the real drama was only just beginning. As dawn approached over Ravencrest Manor, he prepared for what would undoubtedly be the most challenging day of his career. The hours following Marcus's discovery passed in a tense blur of phone calls, legal consultations, and uncomfortable silences. By 6 a.m., the manor had transformed from a peaceful estate into a hub of crisis management activity. William's legal team, led by the family's longtime attorney Margaret Chen, had arrived from the city, along with forensic accountants and additional security personnel. Camilla had retreated to her private sitting room, where she remained under discreet supervision. She had requested permission to shower and change clothes, which had been granted, but she was not allowed to access any communication devices or computers. The weight of the situation seemed to have aged her years in just a few hours. Margaret Chen, a sharp woman in her 50s who had handled the Ashford family's legal affairs for over a decade, took charge of the immediate response. She established a command center in the manor's conference room, where she coordinated with the family's banking institutions to freeze accounts and begin tracing the transferred funds. "The good news," Margaret explained to Marcus during a brief update, "is that we've successfully frozen all major family accounts. The bad news is that the $2.3 million transfer to Harold Ashford's account was completed before we could stop it, and Harry's account is not under the family's direct control." Marcus nodded, understanding the implications. "Have you been able to contact Harry yet?" Margaret's expression was grim. "That's where things get complicated. Harry isn't answering his phone, and according to his assistant, he left for a week-long hiking trip in the mountains 3 days ago, the same day William departed for Tokyo. He's supposedly in an area with no cell coverage. The timing seemed too convenient to be coincidental." Marcus had been wondering about Harry's role in the night's events. Was he a willing participant in whatever scheme Camilla had orchestrated, or was he an unwitting victim? The fact that he had made himself unreachable just as this crisis unfolded suggested the former. As the morning progressed, the forensic accountants made disturbing discoveries. This wasn't an isolated incident. Their preliminary investigation revealed a pattern of smaller, more carefully concealed transfers that had been occurring over the past 8 months. Amounts ranging from $50,000 to $200,000 had been moved from various Ashford accounts to what appeared to be shell companies and offshore accounts. "We're looking at potential embezzlement totaling somewhere between $3.20 and $4.7 million, reported David Kim, the lead forensic accountant. The transfers were sophisticated, routed through multiple intermediary accounts, and designed to avoid triggering automatic fraud detection systems. Margaret Chen absorbed this information with the calm professionalism that had made her invaluable to the Ashford family. Do we have evidence linking these transfers to Camilla directly? The digital fingerprints suggest someone with intimate knowledge of the family's financial structure and access to high-level authorization codes, David replied. The timing and methodology are consistent with someone operating from within the household. Marcus found himself thinking about the months leading up to this crisis. Had there been signs he should have noticed, changes in behavior, unusual activities, conversations he might have overheard? Looking back, he could recall several instances where Camilla had been in William's study late at night, but he had assumed she was simply managing household affairs or handling charitable foundation business. The family's charitable foundation, that thought triggered a memory. Marcus approached Margaret Chen with a concern that had just occurred to him. Mrs. Galpez Chen, Camilla, has been heavily involved with the Ashford Foundation's operations. She has signing authority for foundation accounts, doesn't she? Margaret's face paled as she realized the implications. Call David immediately. We need to audit the foundation accounts as well. The expanded investigation revealed the true scope of what appeared to be a carefully orchestrated embezzlement scheme. Over the past 18 months, approximately $1.8 million had been siphoned from the Ashford Foundation through fraudulent vendor payments and inflated administrative costs. The money had been routed through a network of shell companies before ultimately ending up in accounts controlled by Harry. As the evidence mounted, a clearer picture began to emerge. This wasn't a crime of opportunity or desperation. It was a calculated, long-term plan that had been executed with patience and sophistication. Someone with Camilla's knowledge of the family's finances and Harry's understanding of offshore banking had worked together to systematically steal from both the family's personal wealth and their charitable endeavors. By noon, William's flight from Tokyo was in the air, but he wouldn't arrive until the following morning due to the long international journey and connection times. In the meantime, Margaret Chen made the difficult decision to formally involve law enforcement. I understand the family's desire for privacy, she explained to Marcus, but we're looking at potential federal crimes involving wire fraud, money laundering, and embezzlement from a charitable organization. We have a legal obligation to report this, and frankly, we need law enforcement's resources to trace all the stolen funds. The arrival of FBI financial crimes investigators at Ravencrest Manor marked a turning point in the crisis. Special Agent Sarah Rodriguez, who specialized in white-collar crimes, took over the investigation from the private forensic accountants. Her team began a comprehensive examination of all financial records, computer systems, and communication devices within the manor. During this time, Camilla remained in her sitting room, attended by a private attorney who had been summoned by Margaret Chen. The attorney, Robert Mills, was a criminal defense specialist who had been briefed on the situation and was now advising Camilla on her legal options. Marcus, despite his role in uncovering the crime, found himself feeling conflicted about Camilla's situation. Over the years, he had observed her interactions with the household staff, her work with various charities, and her apparent devotion to family life. The criminal behavior that had been uncovered seemed inconsistent with the woman he thought he knew. Agent Rodriguez requested a detailed interview with Marcus about his observations from the previous night and any other suspicious activities he might have noticed over his years of employment. During the interview conducted in the manor's library, Marcus provided a comprehensive account of events while being careful to stick to facts rather than speculation. In your observation, Mr. Thompson, did Mrs. Ashford seem nervous or agitated in the days leading up to last night's incident? Agent Rodriguez asked. Marcus considered the question carefully. Looking back, I would say she seemed more preoccupied than usual. She spent more time in her private office, made more late-night phone calls, and seemed distracted during routine interactions with staff. But these changes were subtle, nothing that seemed overtly suspicious at the time. What about her relationship with Harold Ashford? Did you observe any unusual communications or meetings between them? This question struck at the heart of what Marcus had been wondering about. Harry doesn't live at the manor full-time. He has his own penthouse in the city, but he's been visiting more frequently over the past few months, often when William was traveling on business. The visits seemed cordial, but I did notice they spent considerable time in private conversation. Agent Rodriguez made notes while Marcus spoke.
"Did you ever overhear any of these conversations?" "Nothing specific," Marcus replied. "But on several occasions, I noticed they would stop talking when I entered a room, which was unusual."
Typically, family conversations continued naturally around household staff. As the afternoon wore on, the investigation expanded to include a thorough search of Harry's penthouse apartment. A warrant had been obtained, and agents discovered additional evidence of the embezzlement scheme, including detailed financial records, correspondence with offshore banking representatives, and what appeared to be a timeline for the systematic extraction of family funds. More damning still was the discovery of a safety deposit box registered under a false identity but linked to Harry through security footage from the bank. Inside the box, investigators found cash, precious metals, and documentation for additional offshore accounts containing nearly $2 million in stolen funds. The evidence painted a picture of a sophisticated operation that had been planned and executed over a period of nearly 2 years. The timing of the large transfer that Marcus had witnessed wasn't random. It appeared to be part of an accelerated extraction plan, possibly triggered by concerns that the scheme might be discovered. Margaret Chen received regular updates from Agent Rodriguez throughout the day, and by evening she had enough information to brief William during a satellite phone call to his flight. "William, I need to prepare you for what you're going to face when you land," Margaret began. The evidence suggests this wasn't an impulsive act or a simple case of Camilla accessing funds inappropriately. We're looking at a coordinated long-term embezzlement scheme involving both Camilla and Harry, with total losses potentially exceeding $6 million. Even over the satellite connection, William's shock and anger were palpable. "Harry? Are you certain Harry is involved?" "The evidence is substantial, William. Bank records, communication logs, and physical evidence from his apartment all point to his active participation in planning and executing this scheme." The silence that followed was long and heavy. Marcus, who was present during the call to provide any additional details that might be needed, could only imagine the betrayal William must be feeling. To discover that both his wife and his brother had conspired to steal from him represented a level of personal and professional betrayal that few people could comprehend. "What's the status of recovering the funds?" William finally asked. "We've frozen everything we can identify, but significant amounts have already been moved to jurisdictions that don't cooperate readily with U.S. law enforcement. Recovery will be a long process, and we may not be able to retrieve everything." Margaret continued with the legal implications. "William, you need to understand that this is now a federal criminal investigation. Camilla and Harry will likely face serious charges, including wire fraud, money laundering, and embezzlement. The charitable foundation involvement adds additional federal charges." As the call concluded, Marcus reflected on how completely the Ashford family's world had been turned upside down in less than 24 hours. The discovery he had made in the early morning hours had revealed not just a crime, but a betrayal that would forever alter relationships and trust within one of the country's most prominent families. The investigation continued into the evening, with agents working to trace additional funds and communications. Phone records revealed extensive contact between Camilla and Harry over the previous months, often occurring when William was traveling. The pattern suggested careful coordination to ensure their activities went unnoticed. As night fell over Ravencrest Manor, the estate that had been a symbol of success and family unity now felt more like a crime scene. The marble corridors where Marcus had walked his security rounds for 3 years now echoed with the voices of investigators and the subtle tension of a family in crisis. Marcus knew that tomorrow would bring William's return and the beginning of what would likely be a very public and very painful legal process. The man who had built a business empire through trust and strategic relationships would have to confront the reality that the two people closest to him had systematically betrayed that trust for their own gain. The second part of the Ashford family crisis had revealed the full scope of the betrayal, but Marcus suspected that the most difficult challenges were still ahead. When William returned to face the wreckage of his personal and professional relationships, the real consequences of Camilla and Harry's actions would finally come to light. The Secret Transfer, Part 3. William Ashford's return to Ravencrest Manor was nothing like the homecomings Marcus had witnessed over the past 3 years. Instead of the usual quiet arrival followed by a briefing on household matters, William's black sedan was met by a convoy of law enforcement vehicles, legal representatives, and media crews who had somehow learned about the investigation. Marcus watched from the security office as William emerged from his car, his usually impeccable appearance showing signs of the stress and exhaustion from his emergency flight home. Even from a distance, Marcus could see that the revelation about his wife and brother had taken a visible toll on the man who had always projected unshakable confidence. Margaret Chen met William at the front entrance, steering him quickly inside to avoid the growing crowd of reporters who had gathered at the estate's main gate. The normally private family was about to become the subject of intense public scrutiny, and William's first challenge would be managing the crisis while dealing with his personal devastation. The media learned about the FBI investigation about 6 hours ago, Margaret explained as they walked toward the conference room that had been established as the Crisis Management Center. We've prepared a preliminary statement, but you'll need to make decisions about how much information to release publicly. William nodded grimly, his jaw set in the determined expression that Marcus had seen him use during difficult business negotiations. But this wasn't a business deal. This was the destruction of his family, and no amount of strategic planning could undo the betrayal he was facing. "Where is she?" William asked quietly. "Camilla is in the East Wing sitting room with her attorney. She's been cooperative with the investigation, but she hasn't provided any explanations for her actions. Her lawyer has advised her to remain silent until you arrived." William stopped walking and turned to face Margaret directly. "And Harry, still missing. The FBI has issued a BOLO, be on the lookout, alert, but there's no sign of him. His hiking story appears to have been fabricated. We've traced his credit card to a flight to the Cayman Islands 3 days ago." The news hit William like a physical blow. Marcus could see the man's composure wavering as the full reality of the situation became clear. Not only had his brother participated in stealing from the family, but he had fled the country, probably taking additional stolen funds with him. Agent Rodriguez joined the group as they reached the conference room, where she provided William with a comprehensive briefing on the investigation's findings. The scope of the embezzlement was even worse than the preliminary estimates had suggested. The total theft now appeared to exceed $7.2 million, with funds scattered across multiple offshore accounts and shell companies. "Mr. Ashford, I need to be direct with you," Agent Rodriguez said. "This appears to have been a carefully planned extraction scheme. The timing of the large transfer that Mr. Thompson observed, combined with your brother's departure from the country, suggests they may have been accelerating their timeline due to concerns about discovery." William listened to the briefing with the focused attention he had always brought to business crises. But Marcus could see the personal cost of absorbing this information. Every new detail represented another layer of betrayal by the two people who should have been his strongest allies. "What triggered them to accelerate?" William asked. "We're still investigating, but we believe they may have been concerned about an upcoming audit of the charitable foundation. Your financial team had scheduled a comprehensive review for next month as part of routine compliance procedures." The irony was bitter. The very financial controls that William had put in place to protect the family's assets had inadvertently triggered the final phase of the theft. Camilla and Harry had realized that their scheme would be discovered during the audit, so they had moved to extract as much as possible before fleeing. David Kim, the forensic accountant, provided additional details about the sophisticated methods that had been used to hide the theft. They used a technique called salami slicing, taking small amounts from multiple accounts over extended periods to avoid detection. The amounts were carefully calculated to stay below automatic reporting thresholds. William's business mind processed this information even as he dealt with the emotional impact. How did they get the authorization codes for the transfers? Mrs. Ashford had legitimate access to many family accounts through her role managing household finances and foundation activities. Over time, she appears to have used keylogging software to capture your personal access codes when you use the computer in your study. Marcus felt a chill as he realized how thoroughly the family's trust had been exploited. Camilla hadn't just stolen money, she had systematically violated every aspect of privacy and security within the household to make her theft possible. Margaret Chen addressed the immediate legal implications. "William, we need to discuss Camilla's status. The FBI has enough evidence to arrest her on federal charges, but they're willing to delay the arrest if she cooperates fully with the investigation and asset recovery efforts.
What kind of cooperation? William asked.
Full disclosure of all accounts, passwords, and transfer methods. Help tracking down Harry and the offshore funds. Essentially, complete cooperation in undoing everything they've done. Agent Rodriguez added, Mr. Ashford, you should know that Mrs. Doxson. Ashford has expressed a desire to speak with you privately before making any decisions about cooperation. Her attorney has indicated she has information about your brother's role that might be crucial for recovery efforts. William was quiet for a long moment, staring out the conference room windows at the estate grounds where he had planned to spend his retirement years with Camilla. Finally, he spoke with the measured tone he used for the most difficult business decisions. I'll speak with her, but not alone. Margaret, I want you present, along with Agent Rodriguez and her attorney. This needs to be documented properly. The meeting was arranged for the late afternoon in the Manor's formal dining room, a neutral space that wouldn't carry the personal associations of more intimate family areas. Marcus was asked to ensure the room was prepared and to provide security oversight during the discussion. When Camilla entered the dining room, Marcus was struck by how much she had changed in just 2 days. The confident, elegant woman who had managed social events and charitable functions had been replaced by someone who looked fragile and uncertain. She wore a simple black dress and minimal jewelry, a stark contrast to her usual designer outfits and elaborate accessories. William stood when she entered, maintaining the formal courtesy that had characterized their relationship even in private. But the warmth and familiarity that Marcus had observed between them over the years was completely absent. Camilla, William said simply. William, she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. They sat across from each other at the massive mahogany table, where they had hosted countless dinner parties and family celebrations. Now, with attorneys and federal agents flanking them, the table felt more like a negotiation venue than a place where a family had shared meals and memories. Robert Mills, Camilla's attorney, spoke first. Mr. Ashford, my client wants to be clear that she deeply regrets her actions and is prepared to cooperate fully with recovery efforts. However, there are aspects of this situation that are more complex than they might initially appear. William's expression remained neutral, but Marcus could see the tension in his posture. I'm listening. Camilla took a shaky breath before speaking. William, I need you to understand that this didn't start as a plan to steal from you or hurt the family. Initially, Harry approached me about what he called temporary borrowing from family accounts to cover some investment losses he had incurred. Agent Rodriguez leaned forward slightly. What kind of losses? Harry had been speculating in cryptocurrency and some high-risk technology stocks without telling anyone. He lost nearly $800,000 of his personal funds and was facing margin calls that would have forced him to sell his properties and reveal his financial problems to the family. William's jaw tightened. Harry's financial independence had always been a point of pride for him. He had often praised his brother for being self-sufficient and not relying on family wealth. To learn that this independence had been an illusion was another layer of betrayal. So you agreed to help him borrow from family accounts? Margaret Chen asked. Camilla nodded, tears beginning to form in her eyes. He said it would be temporary, just until he could recover his losses through legitimate investments. He showed me projections and business plans that made it seem feasible. I thought I was helping family, not stealing from it. But the borrowing continued and escalated, Agent Rodriguez observed. Harry kept saying he needed just a little more time, just a few more months to make the investments work. Meanwhile, he was pressuring me to access more accounts, to find new sources of funds. He said that if we were discovered, he would take full responsibility and protect me. William finally spoke, his voice cold and controlled. But instead, when discovery became likely, he fled the country. Camilla's composure completely broke at this point. Through tears, she continued. 3 weeks ago, Harry told me about the upcoming foundation audit. He said we needed to extract everything we could and disappear before the investigation began. I realized then that there had never been any legitimate investments. He had been using the money for gambling debts, a lavish lifestyle, and funding his escape plan. The room was silent as everyone absorbed this revelation. Harry hadn't just been embezzling funds. He had been manipulating his sister-in-law's loyalty and trust to make her an accomplice in his crimes. When did you realize you weren't going to be included in his escape plan? Agent Rodriguez asked. The night Marcus caught me making the transfer, Camilla admitted. Harry had told me that the $2.3 million transfer was supposed to be the final transaction before we both left the country. But when I tried to contact him afterward to confirm our travel arrangements, I couldn't reach him. That's when I realized he had never intended to take me with him. Margaret Chen made notes as Camilla spoke. Do you have documentation of Harry's gambling debts and lifestyle expenses? Some. He was careless with receipts and financial records because he thought we would never be caught. I have evidence of trips to Las Vegas and Monaco, payments to private gambling establishments, and purchases of expensive jewelry and art that I thought were investments. Agent Rodriguez saw an opportunity. Mrs. Ashford, if you're willing to provide complete cooperation, including all passwords, account information, and evidence of your brother-in-law's activities, the federal prosecutor's office might be willing to consider reduced charges in exchange for your assistance in recovering stolen funds and locating Harold. William raised his hand to pause the legal negotiations. Before any deals are discussed, I want to understand something. Camilla, how could you betray our marriage and our family like this? Regardless of Harry's manipulation, you made choices that you knew were wrong. Camilla looked directly at her husband for the first time during the meeting. William, I've been asking myself the same question for weeks. I think I felt invisible in this family. You were always traveling, building the business, making decisions. Harry made me feel needed, important, like I was contributing something meaningful rather than just managing household affairs. So you decided to steal from me. I decided to help someone I thought was family in trouble. I was naive and foolish, but I never intended to hurt you or destroy what we built together. The personal pain in the room was palpable. Marcus realized he was witnessing the complete disintegration of a marriage and family that had appeared stable and successful from the outside. Agent Rodriguez redirected the conversation back to practical matters. Mr. Ashford, we need your authorization to work with Mrs. Ashford on fund recovery. Time is critical. Every day that passes makes it more difficult to trace and recover offshore transfers. William looked at his wife one more time, and Marcus could see him making calculations that went beyond financial considerations. Whatever feelings he had for Camilla were now complicated by legal necessities and practical realities. I'll authorize cooperation for fund recovery purposes, William said finally. But I want it understood that this doesn't constitute forgiveness or reconciliation. Our marriage is over, Camilla. The question now is whether you'll help undo the damage you've done or face the full consequences of your choices alone. The meeting concluded with agreements for Camilla's cooperation and immediate steps for asset recovery efforts. As the various parties dispersed to begin implementation, Marcus found himself reflecting on how quickly trust, once broken, could transform relationships and destroy what had seemed like unshakable foundations. The third part of the Ashford family crisis had revealed the complex motivations behind the betrayal, but it had also made clear that some damage could never be fully repaired. As evening fell over Ravencrest Manor, the estate that had once represented success and family unity now stood as a monument to the devastating consequences of broken trust and misplaced loyalty. The Secret Transfer. Part 4. 6 months after Marcus Thompson first witnessed Camilla's late-night financial activities, Ravencrest Manor bore little resemblance to the family estate it had once been. The FBI investigation had concluded, the media attention had largely subsided, and the legal proceedings were moving through their predictable phases, but the human cost of the betrayal continued to reverberate through every aspect of the Ashford family's existence. Marcus had maintained his position as head of security throughout the crisis, though his role had evolved considerably. William had asked him to stay on, not just for his professional competence, but because Marcus had become one of the few people William felt he could trust completely. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus that his military background and security training, which had enabled him to detect the crime, now made him invaluable to a man who had learned the devastating cost of misplaced trust. The manor itself had been transformed. What was once a warm family home had become more like a corporate headquarters. William had moved his primary business operations to the estate, partly for security reasons, and partly because he no longer felt comfortable in the various offices and properties that held memories of happier times with Camilla and Harry. Camilla had honored her cooperation agreement with federal prosecutors. Her detailed testimony and provision of financial records had enabled the recovery of approximately $4.2 million of the stolen funds, a significant portion, but far from complete recovery. She had pleaded guilty to conspiracy and wire fraud charges and was currently serving a 3-year sentence in a minimum security federal prison. During one of Marcus's visits to brief her attorney on security matters related to the ongoing civil litigation, he had learned that Camilla spent her time in prison teaching financial literacy to other inmates and working in the prison library. Her cooperation had indeed resulted in a reduced sentence, but the cost to her personal life had been total. Her marriage was dissolved, her social standing destroyed, and her relationship with the Ashford family permanently severed. Harry's fate had been quite different. The international manhunt for him had ended dramatically when Interpol agents arrested him at a luxury resort in the Maldives. He had been living under a false identity, funded by the stolen money he had managed to move to accounts beyond the reach of initial recovery efforts. His extradition and trial had been extensively covered by financial media, partly because of the sophisticated methods he had used to hide stolen funds, and partly because his defense strategy involved claiming that he had been acting to protect family assets from what he alleged were William's risky business decisions. The strategy had failed spectacularly when prosecutors presented evidence of his gambling debts, luxury lifestyle, and detailed planning for permanent flight from the United States. Harry was currently serving an 8-year sentence in federal prison, and civil litigation to recover additional stolen funds was ongoing. Unlike Camilla, he had shown no remorse and continued to maintain that he had been unfairly prosecuted for what he characterized as internal family financial disputes. For William, the recovery process had been about much more than reclaiming stolen money. The betrayal had forced him to completely reevaluate his approach to business, relationships, and trust. Marcus had observed William's transformation from a man who relied heavily on personal relationships and family loyalty to someone who insisted on verification, documentation, and multiple layers of oversight for all significant decisions. The Ashford Foundation, which had been one of Camilla's primary responsibilities, had been restructured with independent oversight and professional management. The foundation's work continued, but William's personal involvement had been significantly reduced. The theft from charitable funds had been particularly painful for him because it had compromised his ability to help the causes he genuinely cared about. On a personal level, William had aged visibly during the crisis. Marcus had watched a confident, successful man learn that his judgment about the people closest to him had been catastrophically flawed. The psychological impact had been as significant as the financial losses. But there had also been positive developments. The crisis had strengthened William's relationships with people who had remained loyal throughout the ordeal. His business partnerships had actually grown stronger as clients and colleagues witnessed his transparent handling of the situation and his commitment to making victims of the charitable fund theft whole from his personal resources. Marcus had also seen William develop new relationships built on shared interests rather than family connections or business necessity. He had begun dating someone he met through a sailing club, a retired federal judge who appreciated his directness and wasn't impressed by his wealth. Their relationship was progressing slowly, with both parties clearly conscious of the need for trust to be earned rather than assumed. The legal aftermath had extended far beyond criminal proceedings. The Ashford family's insurance carriers had covered some of the losses, but complex litigation continued over policy coverage limits and exclusions. Civil lawsuits against both Camilla and Harry were progressing through the courts, though the prospects for additional recovery were limited by the reality that most of the stolen funds had been spent or moved to jurisdictions that didn't cooperate with U.S. asset recovery efforts. Marcus had been asked to testify in several of these proceedings, and he had found the experience of describing his observations and decision-making process to be both challenging and enlightening. Defense attorneys had questioned whether he had acted appropriately in confronting Camilla directly rather than simply reporting his observations to William. But judges and juries had consistently concluded that his actions had been reasonable and had prevented even greater losses. The media attention had eventually moved on to other scandals, but the case had become a frequently cited example in white-collar crime seminars and family business management courses. The sophisticated methods used to conceal the theft, combined with the family dynamics that enabled the crime, made it a case study in the vulnerabilities that wealthy families face from trusted insiders. For Marcus personally, the experience had been professionally transformative. His role in uncovering the crime had led to consulting opportunities with other wealthy families and corporations seeking to improve their security and fraud detection systems. He had developed expertise in the psychology of financial crimes and the warning signs that might indicate internal theft. But he had chosen to remain at Ravencrest Manor, partly out of loyalty to William, and partly because he had become invested in the family's recovery process. William had offered him significant salary increases and bonuses, but Marcus's motivation had evolved beyond financial considerations. He had witnessed the devastating impact of betrayed trust and felt a personal responsibility to help prevent similar situations. The security systems at the estate had been completely overhauled. Advanced monitoring software now tracked all financial transactions in real time, with alerts for any unusual patterns or activities. Access controls had been tightened, and multiple authorization requirements had been implemented for significant financial operations. But the most important changes had been procedural rather than technological. William had instituted regular financial audits, mandatory vacation policies for anyone with financial access, and clear separation of duties to ensure that no single person could control large transactions without oversight. These changes had initially felt intrusive to longtime employees, but Marcus had worked to help them understand that the new procedures were designed to protect everyone, both the family's assets and the employees, from suspicion or false accusations. 1 year after the night Marcus first observed Camilla's suspicious activities, he received a phone call that brought the story full circle. Agent Rodriguez contacted him to report that international investigators had located additional offshore accounts containing nearly $1.3 million in stolen funds that could be recovered. Mr. Thompson, I wanted you to know that your decision to confront Mrs. Ashford that night, rather than waiting until morning, probably saved the family several $million in additional losses, Agent Rodriguez told him. The evidence suggests they were planning to accelerate their extraction timeline significantly. Marcus appreciated the recognition, but his thoughts were more focused on the human costs that couldn't be recovered. A marriage had been destroyed, family relationships had been permanently severed, and a man's trust in his own judgment had been shattered. The financial recovery, while significant, couldn't undo those losses. As he walked through the manor that evening, conducting his security rounds as he had for over 4 years, Marcus reflected on the lessons learned from the Ashford family crisis. The most sophisticated security systems and financial controls were still vulnerable to the people who had legitimate access and intimate knowledge of operations. The greatest threats often came from within, from people who were trusted precisely because they had never given reason for suspicion. But he had also learned that resilience was possible, even after devastating betrayals. William had not only survived the crisis, but had emerged as a stronger, wiser person. The business had continued to thrive, the charitable foundation was operating more effectively than ever, and new relationships were being built on more solid foundations. The estate itself remained a beautiful property, but its significance had changed. It was no longer primarily a family home, but rather a symbol of survival and renewal. The marble corridors where Marcus had first witnessed signs of the crime now echoed with the sounds of business meetings, legal consultations, and the careful rebuilding of a life that had been shattered by betrayal. On quiet evenings, when the business activities had concluded and the legal teams had departed, Marcus sometimes encountered William walking through the gardens or sitting in his study, working on projects or simply thinking. These encounters were always cordial, sometimes extending into lengthy conversations about security matters, business developments, or general observations about life and human nature. During one such conversation, William had asked Marcus whether he regretted getting involved in the family's personal affairs rather than simply focusing on his security duties. Marcus had considered the question carefully before responding. Mr. Ashford, I've learned that security isn't just about protecting property or preventing crimes. It's about protecting people from harm, even when that harm comes from sources they would never expect. I may have uncovered a crime that night, but more importantly, I helped prevent even greater damage to your family and your life. William had nodded thoughtfully. You know, Marcus, I've spent a lot of time thinking about trust since this all happened. I used to believe that trust was something you gave to people based on their relationships to you or their past behavior. Now I understand that real trust has to be based on systems and verification, not just faith in people's good intentions. But you can't live without trust entirely, Marcus had observed. No, you can't, but you can be smarter about how you extend it and how you verify that it's being honored. As Marcus completed his final security check of the evening, he looked out over the estate grounds that had been the setting for one of the most complex white-collar crimes he had ever encountered. The investigation had concluded, the legal proceedings were winding down, and the recovery efforts had achieved more success than anyone had initially expected. But the real story wasn't about the money that had been stolen and recovered. It was about the resilience of people who had faced devastating betrayal and chosen to rebuild rather than retreat. It was about the importance of vigilance, the value of systems and procedures, and the complex dynamics of trust in relationships, where power and wealth created both opportunities and vulnerabilities. The Ashford family crisis had begun with Marcus observing suspicious activity during a routine security check. It had ended with important lessons about human nature, family dynamics, and the price of betrayed trust. As he prepared to end his shift and head home to his own family, Marcus knew that the experience had changed him in ways that would influence his approach to security and relationships for the rest of his career. The lights of Ravencrest Manor gleamed in the darkness, no longer representing the perfect family life that had once seemed to exist within its walls, but rather the possibility of renewal and the importance of remaining vigilant against threats that could emerge from the most unexpected sources. The story of the secret transfer had concluded, but its lessons would endure for anyone wise enough to learn from the Ashford family's costly experience with betrayed trust.